my name is Renee Manderscheid, and this is a presentation of my research project for Course 699 at Morningside College. I graduated in 2009 with my bachelor's from UNI and have been teaching 6th grade math at Callahan Middle School since. The title of my research project is Feedback for Success: Does Written Feedback Provide Greater Math Proficiency for 6th grade math students? The problem addressed through this research is that there are more and more students not meeting proficiency in math every year. Not meeting proficiency levels can lead to low self-esteem, lack of motivation, and lead to students dropping out of school. It can also lead to higher unemployment, more dependence on public assistance, and higher rates of incarceration and being a single parent. In hopes to lower the number of students that are dropping out of school, teachers may use many strategies to help them achieve proficiency. One of them is feedback. I selected the topic of feedback because it's often overlooked as a strategy to provide greater proficiency because it takes quite a bit of time to do it correctly. Also, it's something every teacher can do because it's free. The problem I focused on is how can we get more students to achieve proficiency each year. This research is important to the success of students because it's essential to research what teachers can do for students at an early age to engage them into learning and determine if these types of feedback provide greater proficiency using standards reference grading. Let's take a look at research that was conducted on feedback in the past. Studies that were implemented in the past mainly examined two central domains: the types of feedback given and the effects it has on achievement and motivation. Researchers define feedback as verbal or written information given to a student in regard to their performance on a particular task in relation to a specific learning standard. Most types of feedback are categorized in three main ways: corrective feedback, grade-oriented, and verbal feedback. Corrective feedback is providing students with information on both their strengths and weaknesses of the work, as well as a direction to go with their learning to meet the learning goal or standard. Grade-oriented feedback, or single-score feedback, is one of the most common types of responses given to students at feedback, and that's giving them just a letter grade or a score. Past studies have shown that various types of feedback given to students can affect academic achievement, motivation, and interest. Researchers were able to determine that feedback given to students that brings procedural errors to their attention has led to enhanced understanding of concepts and increased performance on formative assessments. They also concluded that any type of feedback that had comments on students' work was more helpful than single scores. While all this research is great, there is a large gap in previous work that has been done. It's still not clear how the use of different types of feedback affects students' level of proficiency on specific standards. Thomas R. Guskey mentions that as the nation is moving towards standards reference grading, or SRG, there are many questions being raised by educators about how to adequately assess, grade, and support student learning towards meeting proficiency. He also states that because SRG is so new, there's many inconsistencies with how proficiency is determined. This confusion among teachers, parents, and students on how to support student learning through feedback to reach proficiency on specific standards. In hopes to close the gap of information provided to educators about feedback and raise proficiency levels, the purpose of this study was to determine which type of written feedback, either corrective or single score, has a greater effect on proficiency in 6th grade math. The author predicts that when 6th grade math students are given corrective feedback on their daily assignments rather than using a single score, students would have greater math proficiency at the conclusion of each unit. The information gained from this study could reinforce what previous researchers have determined about corrective feedback and relate it to using standards reference grading. It could also provide teachers with new evidence on types of feedback that are effective when using SRG. Let's take a look at the methods used in this study. We used an experimental research design with an independent variable, which was the type of feedback given to students, and a dependent variable, which was their assessment scores. We broke the students up into two groups, control and experimental. The students that were participants in this group were 6th graders. We had 78 of them from Callahan Middle School. 36 were male and 42 were female. We had about 15% were Caucasian, and the other 85% were of African American, Asian, or Hispanic, or mixed race. 9% had an IEP, and 41% were in the ELL program. For consistency and validity purposes, the participants were selected to be in this study because they were all taught by the one math teacher. Since there was only one teacher involved, there was consistency in the scoring, instruction, and feedback given to participants throughout the study. These 78 participants also made up half of the 6th grade, which was an adequate representation of 6th grade students at Callahan Middle School. We broke them up into 2 groups, and for this study, we used a tool called a CFA. The CFA was how we assessed our students. On a yearly basis, this is reviewed by a group of teachers to make sure it adequately assesses each standard. The material used, as I said, was a CFA. The CFA used in this was 20 questions. We used it at the beginning, middle, and end of each standard. It was tightly aligned to district standards and Common Core. There are 2 types of problems, as you can see here, bare and real-world applications. We gave each student a % score. On this, proficiency was considered at greater than or equal to 80%. So this study was done during a geometry unit in spring of 2016. It covered 3 domains, area, volume, and surface area. The purpose of the study was to determine if corrective written feedback provides greater math proficiency in 6th grade students. Therefore, the study, the independent variable was the type of feedback given to students, and the dependent variable was the score on their CFAs. Participants in the control group received single percentage score as feedback on their homework and daily work 2 to 3 times a week. Participants in the experimental group received corrective written feedback on their homework at the same rate. The procedure was that we basically started off giving a pre-assessment. We did instruction, we gave assignments, and we gave students feedback based on what group they were assigned to. We had a middle-of-the-way assessment. Then we gave further instruction, assignments, and feedback. Then we had a post-assessment, and this was repeated for all 3 domains of area, surface area, and volume. The data collection process was that after each set of data was collected from the CFAs, nominal and interval scales were used to place the data into categories like non-proficient and proficient, as well as to find the mean of each subgroup of data. At the end of the study, a t-test was used to determine if there was a significant enough statistical difference between the group's means to justify a possible correlation that corrective written feedback provided greater math proficiency. So let's take a look at the results that we got from our study. Through the collection of data, nominal scales were used to put the data into categories such as proficient, non-proficient. Consistent with this author's hypothesis, the experimental group had a larger number of participants scoring within the proficient range than the control group on all 3 standards, so our hypothesis was actually confirmed. When comparing the control and experimental groups through pretest data, the 2 groups were not statistically different at the start of the experiment when we compared the means and standard deviations of each set. By analyzing post-test data, we can determine that the 2 groups are significantly different and the significant p-value shown suggests that these results did not happen by chance. Specifically, when the data was analyzed by each standard, participants in the experimental group showed higher mean scores and a lower standard deviation on post-assessments than the control group. This means the participants that received corrective written feedback were more likely to score consistently higher than participants that received single score feedback. Through the use of an independent sample t-test and collecting data from the post-assessments on all 3 standards, it was determined that the author's hypothesis could further be reinforced. Post-assessments for area, volume, and surface area, the data is all right here. As you can see, the data collected on all 3 standards show a medium to large effect size. Cohen's effect size refers to how large the difference between the experimental and the control group actually is, and further reinforces the outcome did not just happen by chance. We can also see from the data that each standard supported the author's hypothesis with significant p-values that are all less than the alpha of 0.05. Let's take a look at the implications, limitations, and recommendations for future research. So, while the study has provided additional support to studies that were done in the past, it also provided implications to participants and the teachers that are involved. So the main implication for teachers is that doing all the feedback took a ton of time. So in order to do it correctly with 78 students for 2 to 3 times a week, it took a lot of time. But the good thing is we actually knew where each student was. So we were able to adjust our, assessments and teaching and things like that in order to where we knew the students were by taking a look at their work. An implication for students were that participants in the experimental group was that they had specific errors pointed out to them through feedback on their daily assignments and homework. Therefore, they focused their attention on these mistakes and made corrections and proved to have more proficiency on their assignments than the control group and assessments. This also could result in a higher overall course grade. So limitations would be that the length of the study was pretty short, so it was only about 3 months. There was only one tool to collect data, and we would probably use standardized assessments, so we had some norms to compare to. Students really, since they didn't get a grade for their homework, because some of them decided not to turn it in, so they weren't able to get the feedback that they needed to show the progress and to actually help support our study here. The sample of participants, we could also it was based on convenience. So I would see maybe next time we could even things out a little bit with the same amount of students with the same gender, their knowledge in math, and their language skills. Lastly, a confounding variable was the additional support that students might have received outside the classroom, or the lack of support that students might have received outside the classroom. So recommendations for further research. A suggestion for future research is that the author has to implement this study for maybe 3 to 4 math units. Lengthening the study would also give the participants time to get used to the type of feedback given on their work, and it therefore show us really true effects of the feedback through their assessment scores. Lengthening the study to cover more than 1 unit also may allow the researcher to collect more data on multiple standards within different domains. We asked these students to master about 25 standards a year, and all we did in this study was 3. So lengthening it out would give us a true representation of how this works with standards reference grading. It will also give us a wider range of data to analyze and providing more accurate data on each type of feedback. Another suggestion for future implementation of this would be to assess math proficiency in more than one way. In this, we only use the CFA that was created by district teachers. In further studies, it might be necessary to use technology or to use standardized tests in order to, or projects or standards or project-based learning, things like that. In the future, funding might be necessary to provide more assessments using technology as well as standardized assessments. The author also suggests implementing 2 or more ways to assess proficiency in future studies. The use of technology would be great. Also, it would be great to implement some sort of a reward system to make sure that students are turning in their homework and actually getting the feedback that they need. In order to kind of even out the groups, again, I would provide match pairs and try and get the same level of students in each group. In conclusion, throughout this process, there was a lot of knowledge gained on how to set up, administer, and evaluate a research experiment. There was also a lot of little pieces that fell together that helped me come to a final solution in regards to my research question, which was actually confirmed, or my hypothesis was confirmed. The data collected throughout this experiment has suggested that corrective written feedback also provides greater math achievement, or in this study's case, math proficiency. To connect the study with previous studies, the experiment has allowed researchers to add to previous theories conducted by educational scholars and researchers that supports past research on corrective written feedback and now aligns it with standards reference grading. The current study also analyzed the type of feedback specifically in the math classroom with SRG, where other studies have failed to provide data analysis on. In order to put these findings to work, a little bit of change in school policy and educational practices must happen. The author recommends for all content areas to provide students with corrective written feedback. In doing so, teachers are able to pinpoint misconceptions. I would also like further research to be done to make sure that, yes, this actually is effective, not only in my study, but other content areas as well. In conclusion, with the corrective written feedback in place at every grade level and every content area, students are bound to have higher proficiency rates, achieve goals, succeed on standardized assessments, and become contributing citizens to their community as they grow and advance in their own education. Now that we've gone through this final presentation, I hope that you will include corrective written feedback in your own classrooms. It's proved to be really effective in mine with math, with SRG. So hopefully you will be able to use that and make a difference in students' proficiency in your own classroom. Thank you.